It is nice to see you via, or be talking to you via this webinar. I'm joined by Colin Woolley, who is our bird, oops, sorry folks, I'm gonna get my hand and my finger together and my finger and my voice together and move the slides forward as I'm supposed to. I'm joined today by Colin Woolley, who is our banding coordinator, and he is going to be staffing the chat window. I know that among the people on this call, we have a wide range of experience. Some of you are pretty new birders, and we are aiming this at the newer birders, but we will also have some people who have a lot more experience. Those of you who have questions, feel free to type them in to Colin, say she's not making any sense. Help me with this, and he will either along the way answer your question or we will get to them at the end. Tyler, who introduced me, is our environmental educator. You've met him on our other webinars, and he is going to be our host and troubleshooter this morning. You don't need to take notes. If there's something particularly interesting that you want to remember, you can wait. We will have this posted on our YouTube channel in a few days. We are also going to make PDF slides out of the PowerPoint, so you will be able to get slide by slide and pick up any information off of that. We're going to be doing some quizzes this morning, and you will do that in the chat box. Again, talking to the more experienced birders, if those of you, when you see a bird and I ask you what species it is, you know right away, give the people with less experience on this call a few seconds to think it through before you put up what you believe is the correct answer. Okay. Colin and Tyler and I are part of the education division of Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. Our mission is to conserve birds and their habitats through an integrated approach of science, education, and land stewardship. Those of us in the education department who are spending time helping people learn more about birds and conservation get the vast majority of what we know from our science and land stewardship staff and volunteers. We're happy to be here today, and we appreciate you joining us. This presentation was originally done as a workshop for Denver field ornithologists about a year ago at this time. I've seen 3 or 4 names pop up in the chat box who were there that day. Sorry, we're going to be repeating a lot of what you all have already heard. But I wanted to start by using a quote that I used then, which a friend had sent to me because they said it sounded like my position on birds. The sentence is, a friend once told me that the greatest mistake newbies make is trying to identify a bird by something superficial like color, which is the least interesting thing about it. Character and personality are far more helpful. I think it's really important, particularly to new people as you're starting to bird, and if you're feeling frustrated, just take a deep breath and enjoy looking at the really wonderful creature that you can't quite name yet. You'll get there, and in the meantime, you'll still have a wonderful experience. I want to talk about just quickly about resources. If you are at your desk without a bird book or a bird app at the moment, I encourage you to take a second and pull your bird book out. There may be things that you want to look up as we go through this presentation over the next hour. The second book in this slide is Bird Feathers, and it is a wonderful book all about feathers, and you may find by the end of the hour that you'd like to learn more about feathers. And this book, which is written by 2 people, Scott and McFarland, is a great resource. And finally, Sibley's Birding Basics. This is a little tiny, really powerful book. I think it costs about $7.95, but it gives you all of the basics that you need in order to have the start to becoming a really good birder. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the science of birds as we start to talk about songbirds and identifying them. So a few slides that are going to be a little bit on the sciencey side. When we talk about songbirds, we're basically talking about the order Passerines. And this is a huge order of birds. It includes over half of all bird species. That's something like 6,000 in the world. The characteristics that scientists use to separate Passerine, the order Passerine, from other orders are things that are not terribly helpful to us as we're learning to ID individual birds. First off, it's the arrangement of the toes, 3 facing forward, 1 backward, which allow the bird to cling easily to things. Lots of times, passerines are referred to as perching birds, which seems just to complicate life because, well, pretty sure hawks and owls and cormorants and all kinds of other birds also perch. But it has to do with the arrangement of their toes. And then they have a distinctive vocal organ that allows them to make a wide range of songs and calls, which is where we come out describing this group as songbirds, even though many of them, some of them, don't have particularly lovely songs. Then the appearance of these birds vary widely. The photos here are of the smallest and the biggest. Excuse me. Ravens weigh 3 pounds and kinglets weigh less than 1/4 of an ounce. I mean, we are really talking about a wide range in terms of size and appearance. So it makes getting down to species difficult, and we're going to look at a way to get to species more easily. This is going to take us back to high school, maybe high school biology, when we learned that King Philip came over for great soup. I'm told that the kids are now learning that kids prefer candy over fried green spinach. And it starts with kingdom, biggest category, which in this case is Animalia, then phylum, then class, which is Aves, and that gets us down to order and what we're talking about today, which is Passerine. You then see, after that, you get family and genus before you get down to species. And I believe that it is easier to learn to identify individual species if we first get to family. Even then, we have a lot of birds. We have a lot of categories. I took from the Passerine family list on the web the families that we could see in the United States. And as you can see, there are still a lot of them. But it gets us down one step before we start hunting through our bird book looking for an individual species. So I'm going to give an illustration of why I think it's important to get to family before trying to look for an individual species. And first I'm going to stop and blow my nose. Sorry. Okay. All right. On any given Saturday morning at the Chatfield Banding Station in the spring, I will pull a bird out of the bag, and at least one person will say, if you look on this slide, if you're looking at the bird on the left, they will say, that bird is at my feeder all the time. And this is a perfect opportunity for me to start a discussion about what to look for and how first to get to family before you start trying to identify the species. We as humans have to reprogram our brain a little bit to be looking for the things about birds that allow us to identify them as separate species. And the first thing we tend to look at when we look at this slide, you look at this slide and you say, 2 yellow birds, 2 little yellow birds. And my first question for those of you who are attending today is to type into the chat box, what makes these 2 birds different? Give me one thing that tells you that these 2 things might not be in the same family. Good job. I have included a hint, but almost everybody who put something in got it right away. The beak is different. The bird on the left has that skinny little beak, eats almost exclusively insects, whereas the bird on the right has that fat cone-shaped beak and is primarily a seed eater. There are other differences, and if I give you their backs, you can see those as well. Feel free, if you like, to identify these 2 birds. People are thinking. Yep. One is easier than the other. Okay. And the answers are coming in, and they seem to, you are a very smart group, very well prepared. The one on the left is indeed a yellow warbler, and the one on the right is an American goldfinch. Okay, and so let's take a look at some of the characteristics that are better at considering than just color and just size in order to get us from order down to family and then down to species. Size, shape, and pattern. There are lots of clues and differences. The key is figuring out which differences are most important or reliable. And you'll find that as you become a better birder, you will figure out what's important to you and what helps you to determine which families and species we're looking at. There's no single field marking that is enough. And this is something that Sibley says over and over and over again. Just looking at one marking doesn't tell you what you need to know. So you want to be looking for several things. It's not an exact science. There are, within any species, you will have young, old, different ages, different sexes, and so they're going to look different. You will not see 2 individual birds of the same species and the same age and sex that look exactly alike, probably. So you really need to relax and not try to get too focused on just 1 or 2 things and be too concrete. The secret is to spend a lot of time birding, to get out and practice. Most of you know that as you start to bird and as you gain skill, there are some birds where you get to the point where you don't even think about it. You look out the window into your backyard and you see a house finch and you don't say, oh, I think it's a house finch because it's got those streaks on its breast and there's one next to it that has some red on it. You just know it's a house finch. And that will become true with more and more birds as you gain experience, which will allow you to then spend your time on the fewer and fewer birds that you don't know. Then I want to just point out the things that are really important in terms of identifying birds that we can't do anything about today because we're looking at photos on our screen. For starters, what is the bird doing? If we go back to the goldfinch and the yellow warbler, if you saw that bird flitting through the branches up in a willow tree, picking off little insects, it is much more likely that it's a warbler than a finch. If you are in your, again, if you're in your backyard and you see it at your feeder, is more likely a finch than a warbler. So those are all really important kinds of clues. And then one really important clue that we're not going to touch on today, except right here where I'm saying it, is sound. And people who are gifted at remembering and hearing bird calls are very lucky, and I'm not one of them, but it is a very important factor. And one of the things, for those of you who are more beginners, is sound gives you information about the fact that there is a bird around. Oftentimes you will be out and you will not see the birds, but you will hear one, and that gives you the opportunity to stop and start using your binoculars and looking at the trees. Okay, we are ready for our first quiz, our first true quiz. I'm going to show you a bird, and I want you to tell me what family it's in, and I want you to give me 2 reasons for that answer. And you can put these into the chat box and give those most experienced, give other people just a second to look at these, and before we move on, before you put in your answers. These are different individuals, but it's the same bird. I just had 2 good shots. One that came from Colin and the other that came from Susan Racine yesterday or the day before. Any thoughts, folks? You're being very, yes, the experienced people are being very good. Yep. Okay, great. Yes, we've got this family down. These are both warbler. These are the same warbler. And now I want you to take the next step and tell me what species. And give me a reason. Other answers? Other thoughts? If you don't know, feel free to put in, I don't know what species this is, and that will help us figure out where we're at, whether people are just not responding or they don't know. Good. I don't know is good. Thank you. Not sure. Yellow warbler. Good. Great. Thank you, everybody. Okay. Some have it, and I appreciate knowing that some of you don't know. We're going to take the warbler part of this first, I think, and then we'll go on to the species part. What makes a warbler a warbler? And I think you're all getting this. We talk about color, and you need to be careful. Most warblers have some yellow on them, but not all warblers. And there are lots of other birds that have yellow. So it's a clue, but it can't be used by itself. Beak size and shape, eat small insects, you were all getting that. And they're small and dainty. And dainty is kind of a relative term, and I use it a fair amount, and I think we'll get a little further on and I will be describing a bird that's not dainty that might look like a warbler. And then all the things that we've talked about that we can't see in the photo. Now I'm giving you here another clue as to species. Does this help? When you see what we have at the top is the adult male, and what we have at the bottom is a young female. And yes, that's great. Thank you. Needed to see the black cap. This is really important in terms of learning to identify birds. What we have here is an adult male at the top with that shiny black cap. And what I find at the banding station is when we talk about Wilson's warblers, people say, I know it's a Wilson's because of the shiny black cap. And then the lower one, people don't recognize it as a Wilson's because it has an olive cap. And in fact, what people tend to say is it doesn't have a cap. It does, but just doesn't stand out. And it's, again, it's the human instinct to go to the most visual, the strongest characteristic. And the problem is especially with sexually dimorphic birds, where the males and females and or the young and old look different, you'll miss most of the members of the family if all you can identify is the adult male. So I want us to start to think about bird coloration and the patterns of birds' feathers rather than the color. So both of these birds have a cap. You just don't notice it on the young female. But something else that you can notice that will tell you that these are both Wilson's warblers is that yellow area between the cap and the eye. Both of these birds have a pretty strong yellow spot there. Neither one of them has wing bars. Both of them have very golden, they're very golden birds, and they don't have any markings on their breast. Things like that begin, woohoo, warbler toupees, I love it. Thank you, Emily. So lots of things to think about, but the real goal is to start to think about feathers in terms of groups and their arrangement on the bird, and not in terms of color as much as in terms of pattern. And this drawing of birds and the bird feather parts is in every bird book, I think. And you can pull it up and look at it at your leisure and begin to get a sense of what those different feather groups are. Feathers grow in tracts, and they grow from sort of the top heading down to the tail. The part of the feather that we actually see when we're looking at the bird is just the tip. If you look at the feather, if you looked at one of those breast feathers on that Wilson's warbler, what you would see is that the part that you see is yellow, but the base, the part next to the body, is black. So these feathers have a tendency to move, they expand, they contract as the bird goes through the year. Some of them fade, some of them lose, the ends of them become worn, and you lose some of the coloration that way. And then of course every bird molts at least once a year, some more often, and that changes, and you end up getting back to brighter feathers at that point in time. So it's really important to be looking at the patterns of these feathers, and I want to show you an example of that. This again is the drawing, which will be in the beginning of your bird books. Does anybody know what it means to molt? I'll let Colin take that one. Sorry, I went over and looked at questions. Good question. This gives you just the head, and I'm going to show you a couple of birds. This one, you can, if you pull down the PDF of this after we're done, you can look at these different feather groups, and you can pick them out on this bird just based on the color, because he's got 4 or 5 different colors or shades going on in his head that are the different feather groups. Other times, it all looks the same. The lower bird is, why don't you guys, you can put in what the lower bird is. The upper one is a yellow warbler, and a beautiful adult male yellow warbler. And we tend to look at that head and say it's all yellow. But if you look closely, you can see the different feather groups, the way they come together, and the way that one group of feathers ends and the next group begin. But it helps us in identifying particularly birds that are very close. Yes, I see it. I see yellow rumped coming up. The bottom one is indeed a yellow rumped warbler. Now let's take this down even one more step and look at how it impacts identification of birds. So in the earlier photo, you identified that, many of you identified it as a yellow rumped myrtle, a myrtle yellow rumped. Yellow rumped warbler is the species, and both of these birds in this photo are yellow rumped warblers. They're both adult male yellow rumped warblers. The one in front is called an Audubon, and the one in back, which is the same as the one in the prior photo, is called a myrtle. The myrtle is the bird most likely found in the east. The Audubon is most likely found in the west. And here in the middle of the country, we get both of them. And oftentimes, people will look at the front one, which is the Audubons, and they will say, yeah, they are subspecies. Sorry, folks. People will say it's an Audubon because it has a yellow throat. If you look at the back one, you see it has a white throat. But there's more to that facial pattern than that. And it's particularly important, for example, in the fall, when you have lots of young ones. And the young Audubons have little or no yellow at that time during the year. They get it over the course, they get it as they molt over the course of their first year of their life. So as you can see, it's yellow in the middle, and everything else about the head or tends to, on the Audubon, which is the front one, tends to be gray. If you look at the back one, it's not just got a white throat, but I say it looks like wings. The white comes around the side of the head. And oftentimes we will be out at the banding station in the fall with a young yellow-rumped warbler, and we will spend a lot of time trying to decide if the white goes around to the side of the head and whether or not that cheek spot is darker, because it's much blacker on the myrtle than the Audubon. So just things that we need to look at over time as we're learning about birds and why feathers are so important. Now, this next slide is just for fun. You're not going to run into this very often, but I want to show it to you because, as you know, there are species that can interbreed, and subspecies definitely interbreed. So I'm going to show you what happens when you take the DNA of a myrtle and the DNA of an Audubon and produce a bird that grows up to be an adult. And I just think this is really, really cool. So you get the yellow throat and you get the white wings. And not the wings, but the white on around the side of its head. Okay. Catch up with my notes. So we spent some time on warblers and learning about the basics of getting to family and then to species. So now I want to look at another species that is really important to all of us in the United States, another group, another family. Okay, now, next quiz. I want you to tell me what family these birds are in and why. Give me a reason why you picked that family. And then I want you to tell me whether these are the same or different species. Long tails, brown spots. Yes. Tyler's voting for little brown birds. That's impressive. Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. A lot of you are, in fact, recognizing them as sparrows, which is what they are. Some people are talking about thrashers, and sometime in between now and next week, I'm going to go put together a slide with a thrasher and a sparrow, and we can talk about the differences. These are, in fact, sparrows. I think that this particular pair is pretty easy to identify as sparrows because of the pattern on the wings. They're those, and if you look at those feathers, if you look closely at the feathers, you'll see individual feathers have a lot of activity. They're not just one color. They've got a mix of color on the individual feathers. The patterns on these two birds are a little bit different, but not much. And many of the sparrows, aside from the juncos and the towhees, many sparrows will look a lot like this. That's the point at which sparrows get very, very difficult. And the thing that I say, the piece of information that I convey, once you've figured out that you have a sparrow, you've looked at it from the back like this, or you see it in the field from the back and you know you have a sparrow, the next question, and I got this right out of the Kingree's beginning birding class 20 years ago, was, does it have a streaked breast or a clear breast? Same two birds from the other side. And as you can see, they both have streaked breasts. And if you were looking at your bird book at this point, you would be able to go to the front of the section. Well, at least if you have a Sibley's, you'd be able to go to the front of the sparrow section, and he has pictures of all of the sparrow species. And about half of them have clear breasts. So you can eliminate a whole bunch of species right there. Then I suggest you start looking at the maps, because the maps are going to eliminate a whole bunch of other species that it is unlikely to have in wherever you live at the time of year that you are looking at this interesting sparrow. The things that, yeah, somebody came up with it just then, one of them. The things that I look at on the breast on these two birds is, you can see the bird on the left has a white throat, a tan band, and then a white belly. And the streaks are pretty fine, at least compared to the bird on the right, which the whole background on the breast and throat is white, and the streaks are much stronger. The one on the left is a little bit smaller. The one on the right's a little bit bigger. And yeah, we're getting there. The one on the left is a Lincoln sparrow, and the one on the right is a song sparrow. This is May at Chatfield, and they are both there, and you could have either one pretty much at any time during the month of May. The Lincolns are migrating through. If you're there in January or you're there in July and you see one of these two birds, it's a song. The Lincolns are gone. So there are a whole bunch of clues for figuring out sparrows, but let me just say, Tyler's right, these are little brown birds and they are hard. You will spend the rest of your life studying sparrows. Okay, with the sparrows, I started with a fairly easy to recognize family, and at the family level, and then moved to something much harder, which is telling the different sparrows apart. On this one, I am starting with a really hard bird and then moving to the family. And so for those of you, this is a bird for those of you who are more experienced in the group. And feel free to comment as soon as you have a guess as to what family this is. Good start, everybody. All right, those of you who are saying that you think it's a Vireo, can you give me a reason you think it's a Vireo? Okay, let me move along a little bit and throw up some other pictures of, oops, I went back, of other members of the family. And indeed, the one on the bottom right is a Vireo. It is the most subtle. This is a subtle bird, an individual subtly marked bird of a very subtly marked species. So it's really hard. We caught it at the banding station in 2010, and I hadn't a clue. A young man named Cole Wild was out there that day, and he knew right away, but the rest of us were truly stumped for a while. It is a Philadelphia Vireo, young female Philadelphia Vireo. But in terms of getting to Vireo, and some of you were able to do that, and I see a couple of answers that work, that it has got a thicker bill. It looks, in some respects, it looks a little bit like a warbler, but it's a sturdier bird. It's a stockier bird. It's got a bigger head, and the bill is much thicker and heavier. The other Vireos on this page, this is a family of just lovely, interesting looking birds. The other ones are much more easily recognized as Vireo. The one in the upper right is a white-eyed. The one on the far left upper is a red-eyed, even though you can't see the red eye, which happens a lot. The other two, the one on the bottom left is a blue-headed, and the other one with that wonderful spectacle that looks like the birds are wearing glasses is a Cassins. The Cassins and blue-headed and a third bird now called the Plumbeus used to be one species called the solitary vireo, and they are very, very hard to tell apart. And sometimes even in the hand, we go through a lot of exercises before we are able to recognize them as separate species. But clearly the facial markings are on those birds tell you those are vireos. Finally, if you're really lucky and you can't actually see it on any of these photos, vireos have blue feet, which is a nice way to identify it if you can see their feet. Okay, one last family this morning. We're going to look, and I'm going to give you the family right up front. These are flycatchers, just wonderful birds who get their name from their behavior. They fly off from usually a dead branch where they've been looking around. They fly off when they see an insect, they pull it out of the sky, and they come right back to that perch. These first four flycatchers that I'm showing you, I've picked ones that are big, and if you were sitting there with your bird book, you can probably go to a section of flycatchers and be able to identify each of them. I will tell you what they are. The first one is a great crested. The second one is an olive-sided. The third is an ash-throated, and the final one, the one that is mostly black, is an eastern kingbird. We don't see these, they're pretty rare in Colorado, but they all are found here. And I put them here together. They're bigger flycatchers because I wanted to show you what their primary characteristics are. All of these birds tend to sit up tall. They're looking around. The second one in, the olive-sided, has got his head turned, and they do a lot of that, looking around. They're looking for insects. You can see that they have really wide, flat beaks. And the third one in, the ash-throated, has nicely opened his mouth, and I hope you can see that it's yellow inside. and that helps to attract the insect. That beak is made for the way they feed. Now, we are going to go on to other flycatchers, and these are really hard. Flycatchers get very hard for us here. This is where we get to the flycatchers that start to look a lot alike. And this one, I'm going to tell you, this is the Western wood peewee. And I'm showing you the head, these are three actually different birds, all wood peewees. But I want to show you that beak again, how flat it is and how wide it is. And if you look at the upper head photo that's just the head, the upper one on the right, you can see the whiskers, really prominent whiskers. They're called rictal bristles, and they really help the bird to get the insect, their sensory organs. They help the bird to get the insects into, into its mouth. Now, I'm going to show you one more slide and give you your homework assignment for next week. Okay, I am taking the slide of the full bird that's on your left in here, and all I'm doing is rotating it 90 degrees. It's the same slide, same bird, same everything. I just put it into a different, just moved it. And then I'm going to give you this one. So your job in between now and when we get together next week is to are these the same species? I've already told you that the bottom one is a Western wood peewee. If they're not the same species, what is the top bird? And again, if they're not the same species, what are the differences that you can see between these two birds? Okay. And again, if you want that homework assignment, you can pull the PDF down. Tyler's going to put it up probably sometime tomorrow, and we'll be ready to go. That is the end of the formal presentation this morning. We will stay around and chat with you as long as you'd like to be here and to ask us questions. We'll try to answer them. You might take a minute with this last slide, and you should be able to identify the families of the three birds. Maybe not get to species, but get to family of the three birds on this slide. We pretty much covered that all this morning. I just want to mention that we're doing, as you are aware, we're doing a lot of virtual programming right now, because much of the work that we would normally be doing in this time of year, spring into summer, has been canceled because of the current coronavirus crisis. As a result, a lot of our programs are not being held. They're usually paid for because school groups come out to the banding station and kids go to camp. Our revenues are down. And I would just like to mention that if you are enjoying these webinars that we have been doing, and we love doing them, we encourage you to take a minute, go to our website, birdconservancy.org, and make a small contribution, anything you can afford. And you might, in the column, in the comment column on that web, when you make that gift, just note that you've been enjoying these webinars. So we'll stay and talk. Let's see. Let's put Colin on, and he may have some questions that he may be ready to answer. Yep, somebody got him. Colin, you want to talk?
Yeah, let's see. Did we have any questions that folks had as we were going through?
Colin, I saw a question about binoculars. What binoculars we would recommend?
Yeah, actually, so Tyler will probably have some more to add on this as well, but I think you can get a really good pair for usually, you know, if you're willing to spend $100 or $150, you can do pretty well. There are some really pricey binoculars out there. People will spend even, you know, $2,000 or more on a pair, but you definitely don't need to do that. You can get a pretty good pair for, you know, at least 100 or $150, and the more you spend, you know, it's kind of diminishing returns. So spending $2,000, it's only a little bit better than spending $1,000 or whatever. A lot of times birders like to use, so a question popped up, what magnification do you recommend? Usually, so there's two numbers that are on a pair of, on each binoculars. They'll say something like 8 by 40 or 10 by 40. That first number, the 8 or the 10, is the magnification power of the binoculars. And so usually most birders like something in the 8 or maybe 10 range. So that's what I'd recommend. Tyler, do you have anything else to add?
Let me add, can you still hear me?
Yep.
I'd like to add just a couple of things. First off, I wouldn't buy these online. I would go to a store where you can actually try them, take them outside. People's eyes are very different. There are some binoculars that are much better for people who wear glasses than others. And you may find that spending an extra couple $100 gets you to a pair that really allows you to see what you want. Or you may find that one of the less expensive pairs is good. So those are just things to think about. Try before you buy.
Yeah, I personally use Eagle Optics, which are now, or they've always been, but Vortex. They have great price ranges. They also have a lifetime warranty, no questions asked lifetime warranty, which I think is worth the extra money in the binoculars. I've used it. I dropped my binoculars at camp last year, returned them. They fixed them up for me and sent them right back for no charge. So paying for a good warranty is pretty nice. And I see the question about the different field guides. If you want, you can look back at our Birding 101 webinar. It's on YouTube. We recommend a couple of different ones. I personally, I know Meredith used this as well, but we like the Sibley. It's maybe not the most beginner friendly, but it's the one that you'll use as a beginner throughout your whole birding career, I think. Colin, if you want to chime in on that, you can as well.
Yeah, you know, I agree. It's one of those things that you can get a lot of different good field guides. For me personally, I also love the Sibley guide. It's kind of the one I grew up with and learned with. But it's, you know, similar to binoculars, you can try out a few different ones. And there are some that are more targeted for beginner birders, like Kaufman and some other guides as well. Sibley can be a bit overwhelming, especially if you get the big fat one that covers every bird in the United States. They also split them into an East and West version.
Yeah, also downloading the Merlin Bird app. If you don't want to go buy a field guide right now, the Merlin Bird app that you can download will probably be your best bet right now to identify birds, because it will walk you through the steps and how to identify them. So if you just want an app and to get started, the Merlin Bird app by Cornell is great.
I also think that as you're looking at bird books, I find it really helpful to have the range map on the page with the birds, because some of them have the range maps in the index, and you spend a lot of time identifying the bird, and then you go look at the range map and you find out that, you know, it hasn't been seen in Colorado in 40 years. So I think the range maps are really helpful.
Well, thank you everyone for your input in the chat. I like seeing places where you can buy these or try out binoculars.
Yeah, if anybody, if you have questions in between now and next week, I think if you shoot them to Tyler, he'll share them with us and let us know. There are things that we can include next week that would be helpful to you. We'd be glad to do that.
Yeah, I will be sending out the video and the PDF either later today if I get to it, but definitely tomorrow. And you'll have my email through that. If we love to hear the feedback we're getting from these webinars, this is something something new that we haven't done before. So please feel free to email me. Let me know what you like, anything we can improve on, ideas for future webinars. We're really open to what we can do right now. I know myself, I'm really enjoying these, and I hope you are too.
I just saw a question about what was recommended if you wear glasses, and you can change on most of these binoculars, you can change the distance you are from the front of the binoculars when you have it up at your eyes. And I think it's really important, again, to go someplace where somebody, you know, Front Range Birding Company or Wild Birds Unlimited or some place like that, where they know a lot about binoculars and birders, and you can just try them. You can try the different ones. Some of them are better and than others. At least that's been my experience. The idea of the birds, yes. Oh, yes. We'll figure out how to do that.
Yeah, also, Meredith, if we can list some of the families that they could be, kind of like multiple choice, or you know, just giving them kind of narrowing it down a little bit.
Okay.
Awesome, everyone. Well, seems like the questions are kind of dying down right now. Again, I will send out an email to everyone that registered for this webinar. All of our webinars, we are putting them up on our YouTube page. So feel free to go to Bird Conservancy of the Rockies YouTube page. I'll be sending out a link for that as well, and a PDF. So thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to register for part 2. Meredith will be presenting that at the same time, same day next week. We will be looking for those homework answers. I know it's a really hard one. So look at your flycatchers and see if you can try to narrow it down. So thank you everyone for attending. We're gonna end the meeting. Have a good day.